This is the Uptick Newswire Stock Day podcast, sponsored by InvestorsHangout.com and Equities.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes and YouTube to stay up to date on penny stock news and interviews, public information on OTC, pink sheets, and microcap stocks from around the world. With your host, Everett Jolly.
On today's show, I'm bringing back a returning guest. He was on my show back in June of 2018. We're talking about First Cobalt Corp. You can find them on the OTCQX under the ticker symbol FTSSF. Very undervalued at 12 cents a share with a market cap around $41 million. And with us today is the president and director and CEO of the company, Mr. Trent Mell. Trent, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Everett. Pleased to be here.
You know, give my new listeners, if you would, because it's been a little while since you've been on the show, give me an about statement of who you guys are and what you do.
Sure. So this company, we put it together 2 years ago now. We're a bunch of old-time miners that have worked kind of around the world with much bigger companies. Saw an opportunity with the EV movement to find more cobalt. Right now it's coming out of the Congo, being refined in China. We created an American story, North American story with assets, Canada and the U.S. We got a fabulous asset in Idaho that keeps growing as we drill it. And I guess the big news of late really is the cobalt refinery that we have in Canada, which we're trying to get into a cash flow position here in the next couple of years that will really set us apart from most of our peers.
Explain that press release you guys just put out the other day. That means to you and to your investors.
Yeah, it's been a year kind of in the making, but this refinery that we have in Ontario, it's about 6 hours by road to Michigan. And so what it does, it allows you to make, and we demonstrated that this facility could be repurposed to produce, instead of a metallic cobalt or other kind of form, we could produce a battery grade cobalt sulfate chemical, which is the material that you need to go into a battery. And all of the American supply chain right now is relying almost exclusively on Chinese imports for that material. There is no other facility like it on the continent. And so what we put out yesterday was just news of some metallurgical test work following some engineering work we had done previously, just to show that this facility has an important role to play in our electric vehicle supply chain. And we got a tremendous response. We traded 15 times our usual volume. We were up 38%. So it's nice in what's been a tough market for commodities. It's nice to see that kind of reaction. And I think the real drive there, obviously there's the EV angle, but the idea that a junior like us could find ourselves cash flow positive in the relatively near term really sets us apart and signals that we're not going to be relying on the capital markets to fund ourselves every year as we go forward.
Since you've been on my show, you've had some new people to your board, one being Butch Otter. Why him?
Yeah, Governor Otter, 3-term governor of Idaho. I affectionately call him Mr. Idaho. He's he's certainly well connected in D.C. He served in Washington. He's been not just a lifelong politician. He also was a very successful businessman running Simplot, one of the largest agricultural companies in the country. I think the second largest out of Idaho. So look, he's an accomplished businessman. He's a politician. And our flagship asset, when you step away from the refinery, the processing side, on the mining side, our flagship is Idaho. Idaho is a fabulous jurisdiction. We've got some of the best cobalt deposits outside of the DRC, maybe the best, because they're primary cobalt operations. And a guy like the governor is going to be very helpful in terms of our community outreach, our permitting, and just helping us with our strategy as we seek to de-risk that asset. It's still growing. We're still drilling it. But at some point, we're gonna want to build that, and Butch is going to be a great ally for us.
That being said, what are the next steps for First Cobalt for restarting the refinery? Yeah,
that has to be our focus, Everett. I mean, over the 2017, cobalt was the best performing commodity, and then over the past year with trade spats and a China slowdown and so forth, that the commodities come under a fair bit of pressure. And so there's only about a half a dozen kind of liquid cobalt companies out there with ourselves. And then for us, until the markets get stronger, we started actually to see the turnaround last Friday. The pricing indications that we're seeing in the market for the first time in 3 months have started to go up on the Friday quote, and there's a Wednesday quote as well. So yesterday it went up yet a second time. So we're getting those early signs that we're in a turn. But until the market is back into a little bit more of a bullish stance, the focus really has to be on refining. And the beauty of this facility is, as the commodity goes up and down, it really doesn't matter. Because if you're processing cobalt, you're downstream making the finished product. Your margin, according to our work, our margin doesn't change a lot. If the price of cobalt comes down, the amount that you pay to buy the material comes down with it. And so we're looking at a situation where we could be cash flow positive through the highs and lows of the market. And that has to be our sole focus, our primary focus, at least in 2019, to really set our own path and set us apart from the competition.
Let's talk about China for a second. I don't know if you're aware, or my listeners are aware of, approximately 4 or 5 years ago, it used to be 1 out of every 500 families owned a car. Now it's 1 out of every 70 own a car in China. And they're using a lot of electric power. That being said, where are we at in the cobalt market worldwide view, and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the market as a whole has been growing about 59% a year over the last 5 years. So that's a lot, but you're starting from a low base, right? So this as of last year, we were sitting at about 2.2% of new vehicles sold worldwide were electric vehicles. Now, half of that supply, half of the total vehicles manufactured and acquired were in China. That is the market. And why? Well, they had a generous subsidy program. They can produce some maybe lower end cars more cheaply, things that we probably wouldn't buy in America. But they've also got regulations on their side. The pollution that you see in Beijing and elsewhere is an existential problem that does not discriminate by class. And if you were to apply for a combustion engine license in Shanghai or China, your odds are minimal. You've got, I can't remember what the odds are, it's less than a 5%, maybe a 2% chance of getting a license. And so even now, more recently, we saw news that they're going to cut those subsidies for EVs. And what does that mean for EVs? It doesn't mean a lot because you don't have much of a choice. And the cuts of subsidies for Chinese purchasers to go out and buy the electric vehicles was meant to get rid of the lower end of the market, the less efficient batteries, frankly, the batteries that don't have a lot of cobalt in them. The future's bright. America, we've been lagging here. When you looked at the growth projections in EVs, we were trailing China, trailing Europe. But now when you look at the recent announcement, Volkswagen, LG Chem, and others, very quickly here in the next 4 to 5 years, the U.S. should be second behind China in terms of installed capacity for making batteries and producing electric vehicles. So we're playing a quick catch-up game. My goal is to ensure that we've got security of supply here on the continent, and that Americans we can chart our own path forward in terms of our energy independence and also just the vibrancy of our automotive network.
My guest is Trent Mell. He is the CEO and president of First Cobalt Corp. You can find him on the OTCQX under the ticker symbol FTSSF. In closing here, Trent, what would you want my listeners and your investors to take away from this interview?
Well, maybe if you're an investor, you're looking for opportunities. You got to pick your management team and your assets and do your diligence. But when you're looking at commodities, you got to look at the macro trend, because the best team in the world is still going to suffer in a down market. And cobalt's been in a down market for about 13 months. I mentioned earlier that we've had a positive week here. The early signs in my conversations with traders suggest that the cobalt market might be turning. And so if you start from the premise that you got to believe in electric vehicles, that's half of all cobalt produced today is going into lithium-ion batteries, particularly vehicles. If you believe in the future of that, and you believe that the downturn in the commodity price here has pretty much run its course, or doesn't have much more downside, then this is not a bad time to be looking at a sector that's been really beaten up, because the turnaround can happen pretty fast. And I'm really, really excited about our future.
Trent, I want to thank you for coming on the show. The only thing I ask you is that you come on the show more often. I like to hear what's going on in that space and the minerals that's going on and what you guys are doing. I wish you nothing but the best out there. And please, if you can, come back on my show in 40 or 50 days and give us an update of what's going on with First Cobalt Corp.
I would love to. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
This program is entirely sponsored and produced by Uptick Newswire, LLC, which is responsible for the content. The opinions and information provided on this program are those of the guests and those of the respective companies they represent, and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff or management of Uptick Newswire. Uptick Newswire encourages all listeners of this program to do their due diligence and research when determining investment strategies that will work for them, or to seek the assistance of an investment professional. The guests of this program may have paid for its distribution and are not directly affiliated with Uptick Newswire or this station.